Greetings. This is the Grumpy Old Slan, and today we're going to be taking a look at the April 1925 issue of Weird Tales. So on the cover, we see a man who seems to have maybe jumped off a cliff. We see hands that seem to be pointing to him. And my immediate impression is that this is a very Renaissance art inspired pose for this man. I like the cover, makes me wonder what's happening. Presumably, it is a scene in the cover story, which is when the Green Star waned. So let's get into it. We have the table of contents as usual. We have 22 stories, including a couple of serials. And the first story is from the cover, When the Green Star Waned by Nictzin Dyalhis. Probably butchered that. And this is one of those electrical fictions, science fictions. I'd say more like science fantasy. The main character is from a planet which is clearly Venus, though they have changed the spelling a bit. We'd find out that this is in a far future from us. Several planets are mentioned, and their names are all slightly changed. The Venetians, as they call them, find out that the people of Earth have gone silent. They don't know why, and they decide to go investigate. Earth has been overwhelmed by these evil creatures from the dark side of our moon. Then we'll find a way to fight back, and then there's the war between all the planets and these creatures from the moon. They call them Lunarians. This story is guilty of what a lot of early science fiction is accused of. It makes no sense that if the entire solar system has been colonized and people go to it, that nobody knows what's happening on the quote unquote dark side of the moon. At the very least, they're clever enough to indicate that the dark side of the moon is literally that. It is not the far side of the moon from the point of view of Earth. So these creatures keep wandering around the moon to stay on the night side of the moon. The brilliant scientist who's part of the heroes of the story takes about 2 years to find a way to fight these creatures because they're immune to the blast doors and other advanced weapons that these people have. So at least there's that. The invention is not instantaneous. If you're willing to forget about any kind of scientific realism and you just want to read this as a fun adventure, it's a nice little page turner, but very typical of the science fiction of this time. The next story is Bloody Moon by Harry Harrison Kroll. This is about a curse that seems to be enacting itself on several generations of a family after their ancestors settled in North America, killing natives in the process of doing so in a fairly awful way. Throughout the generations, when a May moon is blood red, the bloody moon of the title, the patriarch of the family, whoever it happens to be, will die. This was an okay story, I guess. It didn't engage me as much as it could have, but I've also read worse. And it's followed by The Lure of Atlantis by Joel Martin Nichols Jr. This is about some people who have discovered what they believe to be evidence of Atlantis in the Sargasso Sea. They will arrange for a boat to go there. One man will dive down and explore a city that is at the bottom of the ocean. The seaweed seems to have a volition of its own, moving around, sometimes entangling them, sometimes not, depending on the circumstances. The whole thing is told by the lone survivor of that expedition, who has gone quite a bit mad. I didn't quite get into this one as much as I could have, but it was still decent enough. It's followed by Deaf, Dumb, and Blind by C.M. Eddy Jr. In this one, the main character is, as the title indicates, unable to hear, unable to see, and unable to speak. This is due to some injuries he suffered during the war. He is a well-known novelist, so he communicates by typing. The story starts when his manservant running away from the house in sheer terror, and so a group of people, including the local doctor, go to the house. It turns out he's dead, although minutes before, as they were entering the house, they heard his typewriter. The doctor will see what's in the typewriter, it will horrify him, and then we actually see the manuscript in question and we get to read it. This story has a clear Lovecraftian feel to it, but so much time is spent getting to the manuscript, and the manuscript is a bit of a letdown, to be honest. Like Lovecraft, a lot of people were looking for new ways to explore horror. Sometimes those explorations weren't as successful as others, and this is one of the less successful ones. This is followed by The Soul-Catching Cord by James W. Bennett and Soong Kwoen-Ling, another name I probably butchered. This is a story set in China, and the main character is one of those scholars who's read all the classics and who would probably be, as the introduction mentions, more suited to living in the days of Confucius. And he's heading home, but he still has quite a ways to go. He gets to a small village. He hears a fight between a husband and a wife. He has enough wisdom to not get involved. He will then witness what seems to be a witch doing something, including hiding a small piece of string, the cord of the title. Out of curiosity, will take it. As he does, he gets a feeling he must not give it up, and it turns out that an elderly woman who died a few years before is trying to take over the body of the young wife. I kind of enjoyed this story. It was kind of fun. Seeing a different tradition of magic is always interesting and inspiring. The next story is The Grim Passenger by Donald Edward Keyhoe. I've done a reading of this, so I will post a link to that. I quite like this story. It clearly takes advantage of the popularity of Egyptology and stories that came around it with curses and all of that. While the ending seems a bit predictable to us today, I wonder how predictable it was, or it maybe is an early example of something we've seen a lot of since. And it's followed by Little Island by H. Thompson Rich, in which a sailor lands on the little island of the title, only to find that two people preceded him, a girl and her cousin. He is quite unhappy about the appearance of the sailor, especially when he sees his cousin is quite smitten with him. However, this island is quite weird, and when there are storms, it seems to be moving, and during a particularly violent storm, they realize the island is going to sink. They do have a small boat and they try to reach it but fail to do so. The girl, however, is worried about her cousin who she can't find. While they do survive, it's on a makeshift raft until rescue comes for them. It was quite nice, a well-told tale. A lot of the story centers around the dynamics between the three characters, something we often don't see in pulp fiction. It's followed by another installment of Seabury Quinn's Servants of Satan, where he retells some of the events surrounding the witches of Salem and what happened then. I've actually looked into it a bit, and quite a bit of what he tells, although it's dramatized, does match the events as far as a cursory reading of other sources could tell me. Interesting, but not a must read either. Next is The Dark Interval by J.B. Powell. This is one of those ghost stories, in part from the point of view of the ghost. He is trying to correct a mistake he made in life. Nothing particularly memorable about this one, though it's written fairly competently. It's followed by Sleigh Bells by Hasan Vokine, set somewhere in Siberia. It's winter. In a small hut, a father and a son are trapped with wolves outside. They've been stuck there for a long time. They're out of food and water, and the delirious father says he's hearing sleigh bells. It turns out that a nearby farmer was coming over to see how they were doing and managed to rescue them. There's a little footnote saying it's a superstitious story and it's typical of stories told by Russian peasants. It's only a page and a half long and doesn't offer any kind of explanation as to what happened, merely asking the question of how did he hear the sleigh bells of a sleigh that was miles away, which is a bit disappointing. And it's followed by the first part of Invaders from the Dark by Greye Spina. I quite like the last story by this author. This is a long, slow burn. The story has a foreword, which is all about how the author presumably got their hands on this manuscript and how it was so hard to get printed because it seems to be cursed. Next, we get into the actual manuscript. It's told by the aunt of a young girl who recently graduated from college and gets a job helping somebody do research in psychic phenomena. She will end up marrying this person who shortly after will pass away, and she decides she will continue his research. The aunt will join her to live with her. The aunt will find out the marriage was one of convenience to prevent gossips from bad mouthing both her and the person she was working for. Other characters enter the story, relatives of the deceased husband who are rather unpleasant people. The kids are misbehaved and the adults are gossipy and have a mean tongue to them. There's also a Russian princess that seems to move into this village where they are and has used the services of the main character's suitor, a young real estate agent, and she seems to be trying to seduce him. The young woman keeps hinting that there's something terrible happening. We don't know what yet. This is a slow burn. The events aren't happening quickly at the moment. The characters are quite well done, and this, for me anyway, was quite a page turner. I'm half tempted to skip the rest of this issue to go finish the serial, but I will pretend that I'm someone in 1925 who had to wait a whole month to see the rest, and will read on to The Wind That Tramps the World by Frank Owen. In this one, presumably an American, is in a small village somewhere in the Himalayas, and he meets with an old Chinese man who, like him, doesn't fit the local color. And he will talk to this man and find out that for 40 years he's been waiting in this village where it's said all the winds of the world will come eventually. And he's listening for a particular wind, the wind of the title, who stole a beautiful flower from his garden when he was younger. And of course, as the main character is talking with this old man, said wind arrives and we see what happens. I quite like this story. It's very different, except for a few minor details. Could be published today. That one is followed by Treasure by Alexander J. Snyder. This one is about a thief who overhears part of a conversation with a doctor, and assuming the doctor has something quite precious with him, will endeavor to steal it from him. But the part of the conversation he did not hear or understand is the part that would have told him that what he's got is essentially valueless to him. Then we have Back from Dust by Frank K. Shaw, in which a young man who was arrested for gambling is sent to court and he has a vision of a past self, perhaps, at least it's an ancestor of his, also being in front of a judge, except his ancestor was in front of a judge during the French Revolution. And then we cut to the judge who has a similar vision of his ancestor judging a revolutionary during the same revolution. Now, will these visions affect the final judgment of the present day trial? I guess you'll have to read the story to find out. I quite like this story, although it really leans heavily on the whole past lives trope, which I'm not very fond of in general. Certainly well written for what it is. Then we have Daylight Shadows by Arthur J. Burks. I've said it before, I'll probably say it again. Don't bother reading his stuff. So, however, at the end of it, we have a short poem, The Dark Pool by Francis Hard. I've done a reading of this one and I'll try to link to it, so look for it in the corner. Next is The Haunting Eyes by Eudora Ramsay Richardson, in which a young man learns how to use hypnotism. At first, he'll do some little experiments with it, in part with his girlfriend. Eventually, he'll start using it to improve his situation at work, hypnotizing people to sign contracts they wouldn't normally sign, and so on. His girlfriend tries to tell him to stop what he's doing. Eventually, he will cause her to die, and then he will be haunted by her eyes. And somehow, from beyond the grave, she manages to hypnotize him to confess everything. I didn't get into this story so much. I really disliked the main character and the fact that after he's confessed to everything, including her murder, and he's condemned to death, and his last words from her to him are, "She's waiting for him on the other side," just made me really dislike this story. And it is followed by The Headless Horror by Robert Eugene Ulmer. In this one, someone who runs a small museum that apparently exhibits this kind of things manages to get the severed head of some murderer. Someone else was also bidding for it, someone he knows and who's on a friendly professional relationship with. He brings his prize back to the museum. Suddenly, strange things start to happen, and he seems to be haunted by a headless figure. He will see it take the head, fighting back. He will shoot the figure. Unlike most ghosts, it will actually fall. When the action is over, they find out that it was this colleague of his who had disguised himself to appear headless to swipe the head from him. It starts quite nicely, but the main character gets really paranoid about everything. The ending felt a little bit disappointing, though. Following it is Through the Horngate by Walter G. Detrick. This is set in a mine. When the shift is over, the foreman goes in to make an inspection, and as he does so, one of the walls that he takes a pick to make a mark sounds hollow, and he manages to break through into the tunnel of another mine that had been abandoned. He knows about this other mine, and he goes into it. He meets what appears to be a ghost. While at first he's lost and he even loses his light, he does manage to make his way out, as he's told by the old security guard about these two people who presumably took refuge in this abandoned mine that he broke into. He just says, "I just was scared because I lost my light," and seems to dismiss the whole thing that way, at least making a show of it, because he's still doubtful as to whether or not he really saw what he saw. I like the start of the story. The conclusion feels a little bit too pat for me. And next we have The Electronic Plague by Edward Hades. In this one, an old man invents a device which will prevent any and all technology from functioning. He will turn it on because he's tired of people driving by his house late at night and all those newfangled inventions that are disrupting his life. Little does he realize that the human body also runs with electricity, and so a lot of people will succumb to it before the main protagonist finds out about it from the man's niece, and he will, with her help, smash the device, which killed its inventor too. And the end where they decide to entrust all of this information to the proper authorities feels a bit odd to us today, but there was trust in the authorities that we have lost these days. That ending is very much of its time. And following that, we have The Last of the Teheman. This is part two and the conclusion. So our adventurers have gone back to the Valley of the Teheman in the hopes of getting one of the prehistoric beasts, and they find out that the people they'd befriended have been taken over by these dog-faced people who are also cannibals. And the adventures continue as the adventurers and their friends from the valley fight off these dog-faced men. Quick moving adventure, although nothing super memorable about it, but it was certainly a page turner. It's followed by The White Scar by Nellie Cravey Gilmore. This is a first person narration about a man who's in an asylum. He was sent there because he killed someone, and then he will tell his story as to why he killed this person. So, the story of somebody who is insane, but in this one case, the protagonist actually turns out to be relatively sane, although a little bit unhinged because of what happened in his life. It's followed by Grizzly's Reception by William Sanford. This is about a rather unpleasant fellow who's in prison, and with someone's help, he manages to get the means to saw through the bars of his window. One night, when he finally makes his way out, he will climb down on his sheets, but he's still maybe 15, 20 feet up in the air, and he will jump down. Little does he know is that there's a cooling vat of tar right underneath where he is, and it traps him there until he is, of course, found by the guards. Yeah, one of those stories that Weird Tales has a bunch of where some character gets their just dessert in a weird and unusual way. And finally, we have the eerie. Again, we have letters discussing the content of the magazine, mentioning what stories people preferred, which aren't always the ones we would lean towards, and a few teasers for upcoming issues. There's nothing special about this letters column. This has been the Grumpy Old Slan, looking at the April 1925 issue of Weird Tales.